Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have this wonderful Rolex Datejust from the early 1960s. And as you can see, it has been worn, and I love that. These are my favorite type of watches to work on. And this one even has that extra element in that it's a family heirloom for the owner. This watch actually belonged to the current owner. His name's Corey. His papa, as he put it, this is his grandfather. This was his watch, and he wore it every day. And as you can see, he wore it hard, and I love that. His grandfather actually bought this watch brand new in 1963, and he was what he called a mud engineer for 50 years. He said he lived life hard and full of laughter, and that this watch, and by the way, that's the current owner sitting there on the ground. He said he teethed on this watch as a small child, and now he owns this thing. He said it reminds him of his grandpa's work ethic over time, and of course, as a way to remember him as well. And as you can see, this watch needs some work. First thing, I'm taking a look at a few things. The crown won't stay in. The crystal's basically destroyed. And it's got this replacement bracelet on it as well. This is not the original bracelet that came with the watch. Yeah, it's going to need some work if Corey's going to wear this thing every day, that's how these type of things are meant to be worn. You know, Rolexes are very, very tough watches. As you can see, this one's still going, even though it has been not serviced in a long time and worn every single day. So that's what we're going to do today on this video. We are going to get into all the nooks and crannies of this watch and get this thing back into wearable shape for Corey so that he can look down at his wrist and think of his grandpa. As you can see, the watch is running. So that's a good start, and we can maybe get the thing open. No. This looks like this case back does not want to budge. So let's just put it on the time grapher. It doesn't have to be out of the case to put on the time grapher. That's a machine that will tell us the health of the watch. And this is just a testament to Rolex. It is not running well. 157 degrees of amplitude is low, but it's only running at minus 13 seconds a day, even with no servicing in years and years. That's really impressive, though it does need a service. And in order to do that, we're going to need to take this case back off. So I've got this case back opening tool. It has a special attachment for Rolex. And as you can see, it has this like toothed section, and make short work of getting this case back off. I'll tell you that. It's really nice to be able to have these really great tools. I've built up my tool collection over time. It takes a while. They're expensive, some of them more than others. And and you know, they're kind of specialty tools. So it does take a while to build them up, but I've been at this for a while now, and I've got a really nice tool collection going, and it's great to be able to use them. In fact, it's one of my favorite things about the hobby. Take a look at the movement inside. Looks pretty good. There's a little bit of concern from me because I mentioned, and you can see it still, that crown will not go down. It's lost the threading that attaches it to, well, we call it the crown tube is the part that it attaches to, and it won't stay attached. And what that means is that moisture is free to enter this watch. Now, as long as you don't submerge it or do any crazy hand washing or take it in the shower or something, it is unlikely that a lot of moisture will get in. But given that it's just open to the elements, moisture still will get in, and dust and debris and stuff like that. And so that's my concern with this watch is, has there been significant moisture ingress that we can actually see? Let's take a look at the dial and hands and stuff. Ooh, that looks pretty good, actually. Although I do see the lume on the hands looks like it has probably been exposed to some moisture as it's turned really dark. We'll have to address that as well. I can take off the hands now. And yeah, we're going to need to put probably a new crown on this. Oh yeah. Do you see those spots on there? Those are actually due to moisture. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. The good news is it doesn't look like, at least at first glance, that the movement has any obvious signs of rust or excess moisture in there. So that would be really good, because we can deal with the hands, but the movement, we're talking about replacing parts at some point there. I can take off the dial. This does have a date function. This is the Datejust. Rolex has two watches. They look pretty similar to each other. This is the Datejust, and then they have one called the Day Date. That one's also known as the President or the Presidential. That one also has the day of the week along the top, but the real differentiating factor for that one is that it only comes in precious metals. It only comes in gold, both rose and yellow gold, and then it also comes in white gold, and then I think they make a platinum one or something too. But Datejusts, they come in steel. This one is a stainless steel case, and then it also has gold, like the bezel's made out of gold, because this is a two-tone model. All right, we can finish removing the calendar works as well as the cannon pinion. We're going to do all of it, though. I'm going to get this. I'm determined to get this watch not only running well, but looking really good and ready for everyday wear. I really love the fact that Corey's grandpa wore this every day. It very much is something that reminds Corey of his grandpa. He can see this watch. I mean, he literally teethed on it. I mean, that is crazy, right? And now he's grown up, and he's ready to wear this thing. And I want Corey to be able to put this watch on and know that it's going to be good to go. And there's no reason that can't happen with this type of watch. These are very tough watches. In many ways, this is like the perfect watch for how it seemed like his grandfather was, a hard-working person who, as he put it, lived life hard and full of laughter. And this is a perfect everyday watch for somebody like that. So what we're going to do, okay, good. Almost a rough start there. This is a little tension spring that's held down, that holds down the seconds hand pinion, which is right there. And it jumped on me. What was I saying? What we're going to do today is we are going to completely disassemble every aspect of this watch, the entire movement. We're going to take apart the case, the crystal, the winding stem from the crown, all of it. And we're going to determine what needs to be replaced or restored, what needs to be serviced, and then we're going to put it all back together, and hopefully we'll have a really great watch at the end of it. So sit back and relax, because that's the journey we're going on. Yeah. Disassembling these Rolexes is a real pleasure. It's always interesting. I like to remind people that, these watches were much more made for kind of a working person when they were made, like here in the 60s, rather than, they're viewed more like as a status symbol now or something fancy. And yes, they were a very nice, high quality watch back then as well, but that's kind of all they were. They didn't cost as much as they cost now, even if you adjust for inflation over time. They still were more affordable to people than they were, such that, a working person, right? Somebody who's a mud engineer could save up and go get one of these things and wear it every single day with pride, right? And that is really what Rolex was all about back then. It's a little different now. There's still some aspects of that, I think, but there's also a higher end exclusivity associated with them that they didn't have before. And this is a really good example of a watch just like that. I was talking about the tools before, and how much I love using them and maintaining and getting them. It's just a real pleasure to be able to use, high quality tools, really whatever type of work you're doing. And that was part of the reason why I started a website with my friend Alex. It's called Sutcliffe Hansen. And it's actually for watch repair tools like this for beginners. So for people that, maybe watch my videos and have asked me, hey, how do I get into this? This hobby looks really cool. You realize very quickly that it's very daunting at the beginning. about which tools you're supposed to get. And so I actually put together toolkits using what I think are the best ones as far as a price to quality compromise to start off with. And you even get, with some of our kits, you get like a movement to practice on, like not a particularly expensive movement to practice on, so you can kind of dip your toe in the pool before you start doing stuff like this, you know, because you want to learn what you're doing. We even have online classes on there from our friend Mark Lovick over from Watch Fix. He has the watch repair channel here on YouTube, and you can buy the classes there. So you can kind of get all set up to dive into the hobby. I'll put a link down below again at sutcliffehansen.com if you're interested in that, or if you know somebody that might be. This is called the keyless works, this part of the watch. I remember it was a bit of a mystery to me. I knew how to work on it, but I didn't know how it worked actually until I got a microscope. And once I finally decided that I would try out using a microscope to work on a watch, which I do, you'll see, you know, sometimes like when I work on the jewels and certain things, I'll put it under the microscope. When I first got it, I went in there and looked to try to see what I could see about the keyless works, and it really kind of put it together for me. This is also the part of the watch that's the closest to the crown and stem. And as you can see, there actually is a little bit of rust staining there right on that part. It's not too bad, but there is some. And again, that's because that crown was no longer able to grab on to the case tube and create that watertight seal. And I'll tell you that's a warning. If you have a watch, particularly a nice one like this, and the crown won't stay down, you should not continue to wear that watch until you get that repaired, because you are definitely at risk of letting in more water than this watch had come in, I'll say. And if you do that, now you're looking at a pretty big bill, talking about replacing movement parts or, doing de-rusting of some sort. It can get pretty nasty pretty quick. And in a worst case scenario, if you do get caught in a rainstorm or your wrist gets, near too much water, it can flood the whole movement with water. And that can get on the dial, the hands, like parts that you actually see and that are very difficult to fix. And then you're in a real pickle. So be careful with that. If the crown won't stay down, your watch is not waterproof anymore. Not even close. All right, here's the automatic winding works. And again, I can see, do you see all that, the kind of staining that's on there? That is also a result of water. Again, not water, but moisture coming in. And since this is also exposed on the back, this is a place where that moisture can come. There's a little tiny retaining C-clip that goes over the winding rotor here. And so I need to remove that. I use the Rodico just to make sure it doesn't fly away. Oh, interesting. Take a look. Do you see that green? Yeah. See, that's like it's not rust, but it's like a buildup because of moisture. Probably need to deal with that as well. The good news is it doesn't look like too much got in. It was more like maybe humidity that had entered the watch over a long period of time rather than like a flood of water. And that is generally less damaging. How does the mainspring look? Actually looks okay. The barrel is sealed off, so it's pretty difficult for water or anything like that to get in. But as you can see, grime can easily form on the inside of that barrel. That's very common, in fact. Here's the case back. Let's take off the gasket that goes around the back, and look at that, it already broke. These gaskets, over a long period of time, they turn into something that feels more like a plastic rather than a pliable rubber. And that means that it is no longer able to do its job of sealing off the case back. This probably was still doing the job because it was more or less adhered. Watch. Yeah, it just snaps so easily because it was probably adhered to the inside of the case back and the case. But once I opened it, it would no longer be able to do its job anymore. Okay, now what I can do is I can put all of the parts of the watch into a tray or into the watch cleaning machine basket, depending. I already have a project in the watch cleaning machine right now, so I'm just going to put everything in this parts tray. This helps keep... keep things organized and also dust free, and until I can put it into the watch cleaning machine. This tool is a bezel removal tool. This will allow me to remove the gold bezel that goes around the outside of the front of the case. And it uses these 4 jaws that come in, and they come in simultaneously so that there's no wrenching on one side of the bezel and perhaps bending it or deforming it or damaging it. So let's take this off. This bezel is decorative, it's machined, and it's still a little bit stuck on, so I'm just going to use a case knife to pry it the rest of the way off. It is made out of gold, so you got to be careful with it. And it goes around the outside of the acrylic crystal, and it actually pinches down on the outside of the crystal and allows it to even be more watertight. As you can see, there's a good buildup of grime. This is very normal on a watch like this, particularly one that's been well worn. And there's a bunch of it underneath there too. Now the crystal should just pop out, and it does. It is in very, very rough shape. I will be leaning towards replacing that crystal. I technically can refurbish a crystal, but once too much of it's been worn off, it has almost like a wavy texture to it, and that's no good. And it's much better just to replace it with a new one. Okay, now we can put all the parts into the watch cleaning machine. This is a 3-part process. This is a cleaner up front and then 2 rinses. And then there's actually a 4th part of the process, which is drying, and it will clean and dry all of the movement parts basically perfectly. While that is being done, I did want to say thank you to each and every person who supports me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/wristwatchrevival if you'd like to support me. Patreon is just a place you can go to support your favorite content creators. It helps people like me continue to make the content that we make, and I really, really appreciate everybody who takes the time to support me over there. Again, there's a link down below to it, and if you sign up, you get a Wristwatch Revival sticker and a thank you card in the mail for doing so, as well as access to some cool perks like the videos a little bit early and uncut versions and stuff like that. Anyway, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. Okay, next step is to put everything into the ultrasonic cleaner. This is a special machine that if you put a liquid in it, usually it's water, maybe it'll have some detergent. This has like a kind of a clinical grade detergent called Liquinox that Alex over at Watch Repair Tutorials here on YouTube recommended, and I've found it to be very good. And basically it sends ultrasonic waves through the liquid, which then apparently they form these little things called cavitation bubbles on the surface of the material that's inside. And it forces any little debris or anything that's on it to come off. And as you can see, once we're done, everything looks nice and sparkly and beautiful. Well, almost everything. Taking a look at the hands on the microscope, you can see that the lume is completely toast. It's turned black, and there's even holes in it where it's deteriorated. This is the back of the hand. The hands themselves don't look like they're in very good shape either. There's some type of water staining on them, and that may need to be addressed as well. So yeah, that's another thing that we're going to need to do. But first things first, let's take a look at this case. I need to take out the case tube, replace it, and replace the crown. So do you see the splines on this special tool? Are you getting the vibe here? Special tools everywhere, right? That's part of the joy of this hobby. The problem is that these splines are meant to interact with a special type of crown that Rolex uses, and this watch doesn't have that. In fact, there's no splines in there, so I need to find another way to get this crown tube off of there. And I found a really cool way to do it. So I can use a lighter here to break up any adhesive and just to potentially loosen it up. I only need the flame for just a few seconds on there. But this tool is called an Easy Out, and it's actually made to remove screws that have been stripped or are stuck. So when you turn this the way to undo it like this, it actually grabs onto the inside of the case tube, and theoretically, it should come right out. And look at that. Normally you have to use like a graver or some type of sharp piece of metal that you can jam in there to take it out. And it's really hard. Like seriously, it's a major chore. And this actually preserves the part a little bit, but it doesn't matter because that part's not going to be used again anyway, because it's no longer functional. It doesn't have threads on it anymore. So I got I actually found an actual Rolex one. This is rare. Normally you have to get replacement parts that aren't genuine Rolex for something like this because these are just so hard to find. They're also very expensive when you do find one, but I did find one. And so we're going to go ahead and use the original part or an unoriginal part here. A little bit of isopropyl alcohol and a swab just to make sure that there's no leftover adhesive or anything. People will typically use Loctite on these. Oh, do you see those splines? That's what actually interacts with the special tool I have right here. That's what the original one was supposed to look like, right? That's how it was supposed to go. And you can see it interacts with those splines and gives you something to grab onto that's nice and strong. So I am going to use just a little bit of Loctite on the threads here. Okay, that's a little bit too much. You don't need that much. It doesn't hurt anything, but I'm just going to use a piece of pegwood to reduce the amount a little bit. This is the type of Loctite that will help keep this part intact without kind of permanently gluing it in place. You use the lighter Loctite for this. You don't need it to be completely adhered in place. You just want it to kind of fill in the nooks and crannies. And as you can see, I can use this tool now to securely put the new case tube into place. And I have to say, very satisfying. Okay, so with that done, I can also replace, because we're here and it's got a brand new one, the gasket that goes inside of that case tube. These Rolexes use a few different ways to prevent moisture from coming in, and this is one of them. They use a gasket on the inside of the case tube. There's also a gasket on the inside of the crown, and then there's a gasket on the case back like we saw that one that had more or less failed. This is a crown, and if you look inside, you can see the gasket in there. And I actually, do you know what this is? Hopefully this doesn't give you anxiety. This is the thing they use at the dentist, to like scrape your teeth or whatever. And I bought one. It turns out you could just buy them on eBay, and I modified the tip of this thing so that I can use it to dig out these gaskets because they get kind of stuck in there and it's really difficult to get in there and remove them. So I found this, it's really nice. It was like $30. And again, I'm a tool junkie. Okay. Like I love tools and this is just another one of that, of evidence of that. But yeah, this is like literally one of those things that they use at the dentist, and it works pretty dang well for taking out the gasket. I think I got a winner here. Kind of weird, but it did work. Anyway, and then this is a brand new gasket that I can put into here. And again, these two gaskets will work in conjunction to make sure that no water can get in. Now, this is the old crown. I just put the gasket in the new crown that I had bought. And by the way, when I say new crown, it is a used new crown. It's in really good condition, but it is not a brand new crown. I didn't even know where I would find one of those if I was even so lucky, and I don't think I could afford it if I did. They are very, very expensive. But what it means is I do need to reuse the stem here. So I'm going to use my pin vise to take out the old stem from the old crown. I'll clean it up a little bit with some Rodico. That's that kind of silly putty stuff. And once again, a little tiny bit of Loctite to make sure that it stays in place. All you have to do is just kind of get some on the tip of this winding stem, and then you can just screw it firmly into place with your hand. And again, as I mentioned, this is going into the new crown that I got. There we go. Just like that. So now, new case tube, new crown, and new gaskets. So that should solve that particular problem. Now we can take a look at the crystal. Now I found this crystal at a watch materials website. It is not a genuine Rolex crystal. Again, those are more or less impossible to find, and they're ludicrously expensive if you do. Like I would assume a crystal like that would be about $500 for a piece of plastic, by the way. They're made of acrylic. So, and you can't find them anyway, even if you wanted to spend that kind of money. So instead, I usually go for these high quality replacement crystals. Now, the way this works is I have to use my press here to push the bezel around the outside edge of the crystal, though it does seem to be a particularly tight fit on this one. Ooh, that didn't sound good, actually. Yeah, this doesn't feel right. And normally that should just slide on much more easily than it just did. And it feels like maybe it even broke. Wow, it totally broke. Huh. So I guess that means that this is the wrong crystal, or I got a bad one or something. So I ordered up another one from a different website, and we're going to try this. I'm going to make sure, though, that this actually kind of fits over the edge. Yeah, it's a little bit tight, but that's a little bit better of a fit than that original one. So let's give this another shot. You know, these crystals have that little magnifier for the date. That's called the Cyclops. Yeah, that does feel like it has a little bit more wiggle room. So let's give it another try. And we should see that bezel snugly fit over the outside of the crystal here without breaking it. Yeah, see, that's what I wanted to see when I put on the other, but it never even got that low. Yeah, that's much better. So this one seems to have fit well. And, you know, that does happen sometimes, that you order a part and it's just not quite right for some reason, particularly if you're going with aftermarket parts, which, again, you're kind of forced to do in a lot of scenarios, especially with crystals. All right, I'm happy with how that turned out. New crown tube, new crown, new crystal, and all the gaskets ready to go, which means we can turn our attention to the movement. Now, to start things off, I want to assemble the mainspring barrel. But in order to do that, I do need to use some braking grease on the inside wall of the mainspring here, of the barrel, I mean. And that's because this is an automatic watch, and the outside edge of that spring will slide around the inside of that barrel. And you want to make sure that there's some type of grease there so it's not just metal on metal. Now I'm going to be replacing the mainspring on this watch. And that means that instead of using my mainspring winders, I can just use this little metal disc to insert the mainspring in. You just simply press it into place and boom, that's it. That's the whole operation. It's really nice. You know, I do love using the mainspring winders. I've used them many times on the channel. If you watch my videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you are new to the hobby, or if you're just starting out, it's totally fine to just replace the mainspring every time. And then you can do it how I just did it, and you don't have to mess around with the mainspring winders, which are expensive and kind of difficult to use. This little tool here just helps you snap the case or the lid onto the barrel. You can use your tweezers to do it too. You don't need it. But I mean, I picked up that thing for, I don't know, it was cheap. It was on eBay for $15 or something like that, and it's worked for years. This is the setting lever screw. This is the one that gets you when you're new because it actually goes on this side of the movement, the side with all of the, you know, the train of wheels and the barrel and everything, even though the thing that it screws down onto is on the other side of the movement. But the thing that gets people is that it goes underneath this part right here. It sits under the barrel bridge, and you can't put it on if the barrel bridge is already on. So you need to remember to put that on before you put the barrel bridge, or you'll have to go back and undo it all and then just to put in that thing. And it happens a couple of times and you go, okay, I'm not going to forget that one again. Okay. Now I'm going to take apart the click here. I left it in situ for the cleaning process just because it is still able to be nicely cleaned in there. And that way it's kind of one less thing to lose. The parts are very, very small, particularly this part right here. That's the click spring. And it makes it a little bit easier to just leave it in place. But I do need to lubricate under here. So I'm going to use some medium viscosity oil. This is the HP 1300 oil. For the most part, if you watch, you'll see that I use 3 main types of oils, and you can think of them in terms of kind of like t-shirt sizes, like small, medium, and large. The small would be like the lightest viscosity oil for applications in the watch that are very low friction. And the medium is this one, that red oil, again, the HP 1300, and that's for medium. And then the blue stuff is the grease, and that's the large, if you will, and that's for like the metal on metal under tension type stuff. We've actually got a toolkit up on Sutcliffe Hansen that is just the oils. It comes with the oiler that you need, and then the oils, and then a little cup that you can put them in if you don't have one of those yet. So that you don't have to figure it out. You know, that's kind of the main, it's hard to there's so many different oils out there. You need a few more than that as well. It's not just those ones, but those are the main ones. This one's called the center wheel. And as you can see, the middle of it is hollow, and it actually will hold another pinion, another pivot that goes all the way through to the other side. And that's the one that the second sand will sit on. But we don't need to install that just yet. And this is called the train wheel bridge. As you can see, it has 4, it technically has 5, but the 5th isn't used just yet. It has 4 jeweled tops there. The 5th one that you see over on the left, that one actually engages with the automatic work, so it doesn't need to like line up with anything at this point. But the other 4 do, including all these wheels. And you see how that escape wheel kind of dances around? That's because, because it wasn't engaged until now, where you can see that it's spinning freely. And that's just a hallmark of these Rolex movements. They really were designed to be serviced, to be worked on. And there's all these little things that they do that shows you that they really care about the watch repair in mind, that they said, hey, when we build these, we want these things to be serviceable. And it's very much appreciated. Okay, here's the sliding clutch, and this will take, or the clutch wheel, excuse me, and this will take a little bit of the 9501 grease that I had mentioned before. This is the large. And that's because these are full on metal, and they're held under the tension of a spring as well. So, you know, these really do require a good amount of lubrication. Okay. Now I can put in the new crown with the old winding stem. I didn't see anything wrong with it, so repurposing it seems fine. Again, blue grease going on here. Now I can carefully install it into the movement. Little bit of our lightest viscosity oil on this side because that one jewel is about to get covered up by a wheel. So this is kind of my last chance to oil that. A little bit of blue grease on the bottom of the center wheel, and this is where the cannon pinion will snap into place. Just like that. That's another very high friction part. And this post just holds an intermediate wheel. It just sits here between the sliding clutch and the minute wheel, as it turns out. I'm not going to install that quite yet. And this finally is the setting lever. This is the part that screw that I put on that I talked about screws into. That screw has just been sort of sitting there this whole time. And in order to actually screw it down, I usually have to remove the movement from the movement holder and kind of hold that part in place while I get it screwed down. This is called the yoke, or some people call it the return bar. There are multiple names for basically all watch parts. I think it just kind of depends on who taught you or where you learned what you call it. I call it whatever Mark Lovick called it because I took his classes and watched basically every single video on his YouTube channel. I really feel like I owe Mark a lot. He inspired me to actually try this hobby. You know, I've always been interested in stuff like this, but I'll be honest, I didn't even think you could do it. Like, I just thought that this was like the realm of magicians or something. You know, I did not think that that a hobbyist could try stuff like this. And you know, by watching his videos, I started to get more comfortable with the different parts of the watch, and I started to get more interested in the history and kind of the meaning behind these watches. And I found myself in a position where I, had been working on cars quite a bit with my dad, but he passed away and I moved to an apartment, and I don't have a garage and stuff. And, a lot of the stuff I do is stuff like making these videos for you where it's kind of on a computer. Now I love that. I love computers. I love making stuff. So it wasn't so bad, except for that I did miss working with my hands. I miss working with metal or, woodworking or helping my dad with stuff around the house, stuff like that. And this really filled that role for me, because I can have most of the tools that I use to do this hobby fit in like a shoebox. I mean, they're small. Even the tools that look big aren't that big. And it means that I can take them out, put them on my desk, which is where I'm working, by the way, right now. Like, this is just my computer desk. I don't have like, some crazy dedicated anything. I just take the stuff out when I want to work on watches, and I work on them. And I just didn't know. I just didn't think that it would be possible to do this, but I was wrong. It really is. It's hard. I mean, this is this is one of those kind of crazy hobbies, that it kind of never ends. You can always get better at something. There's always some project or tool that you've never done or that you're aspiring for, but that's what I like about it. There's always something interesting to learn. There's always a new technique that, you could improve at. And I just needed that inspiration. All right, here's the ratchet wheel going into place. You can tell that it has a square hole in the middle, and that engages with the square top of the barrel arbor, actually, the little part we put into the mainspring barrel quite a while ago. And this screw kind of squishes them together so that when one turns, so does the other. And the way it actually works is this ratchet wheel is what gets turned when you turn the crown. It's also what gets turned by the automatic winding works. And then that turns the barrel inside, which pulls the mainspring toward it. And the mainspring desperately wants to unwind. And that's what you're actually trying to control when you design and build a watch. The very carefully regulated unwinding of a coiled piece of metal. And somehow human beings have been able to figure out how to time that such that it can keep astonishingly accurate time given the technologies here. This is just a solvent that I'm putting both the pallet fork and the balance into, just to make sure that everything's as clean as possible, particularly the pallet stones and particularly the hairspring. That's that blue spring that you see in the middle there. Any type of contamination on there can really screw stuff up. So just making sure that it's in really good, clean shape can go a long way. Now I can put in the pallet fork and the pallet fork bridge that holds it down. As you can see, there's a jewel on the top and the bottom of that. This is a sensitive operation. The pallet fork has pivots on the top and bottom. Think of them kind of like axles. They're very, very thin. So you got to be really careful to not tighten down anything until you know for sure that they're engaged properly with the jewels on the top and bottom. That's why you'll see people, kind of go back and forth with the pallet like I did to make sure that it's properly engaged. And then after putting a little bit of a wind in, you can also make sure that it's, engaging with the escape wheel properly. Okay, now we can put the balance in, and let's see if this thing will spring back to life. It dang well better because it was running before. Okay, there it goes. Oh, yeah, no, it's gone. The balance just has to have kind of everything line up in order for the watch to run again, but it means we're on the right track, and I like to see it. And then I can screw down the balance. Sometimes it'll stop while you're screwing it down, but that's okay. And there we go. It seems to have actually kicked up quite nicely, so I'm happy about that. Now we can transition over to doing the oiling of the jewels. So I'm actually going to show you the bottom setting of I normally show the top, but this is the same as the top, it's just down on the bottom. So instead of sitting on the balance bridge itself, it's sitting in the plate at the bottom, the main plate there. And it's the same thing though. There's a cap jewel and there's a hole jewel, and you need to take them both out and they need to be cleaned. And you can do this a number of ways. The way I like to do it, and by the way, do you see that staining in the middle of the jewel? That is from old oil that has dried up and has become kind of attached to the jewel. So what I like to do is manually clean it with the tip of a little bit of pegwood and then re-put it back into the solvent, and that will fully dissolve the rest of any debris or anything that might still be left on there. It does have a domed side and a flat side, so you do have to be careful. Now I can put just a droplet of the, that was a little bit too much. Yeah, I'm going to restart. It's okay to just redo it if you screw it up. You want a little bit of oil, but you want it kind of in the middle of the jewel and not too much, and that was too much. It would basically flood out the sides if I did that much. So I'm going to go ahead and try it again. There, that's much better. And now I can take the whole jewel and I can carefully place it back on top, or this is actually the bottom of that jewel. And what it'll do is it'll kind of grab on because of the liquid. The capillary action will kind of suction it onto there, and that will make it ready to put back into the watch. And again, this is just the bottom of the balance, but both the top and bottom need this treatment because this is what really frees up that balance wheel to ride freely. There's oil that's suspended right there on the pivot, and that pivot rests on the cap jewel, meaning that it's only the tip of that pivot that's keeping it from having any type of friction, and that means that it can spin very freely. Now, this is actually also a shock protected jewel with a cap jewel, though this one is actually on the escape wheel. So Rolexes and some other models kind of go the extra mile, because this is the second most likely thing to break if you were to drop your watch. The balance is by far the most, but this one is also at some amount of risk. And again, you see that gunk in the middle of it? Yeah, that's old oil that has been dried up on there. The person who serviced this the last time it was serviced did do a pretty good job, but it was a really long time ago. And that oil is long gone. That is, of course, meant to be in liquid form still. So once it's dried up, it actually kind of acts against its original stated mission. And take a look how clean that is now. See that? It looks like a mirror. That's what you're looking for. And once again, same process here, just a little droplet of oil. There we go. Now this one doesn't have that whole jewel, so I just have to carefully try to place it back in. There's also another way that you can do this where you can put the jewel in dry and then you can use what's called an automatic oiler to oil it from the bottom, but I prefer this method. And you can see the ring of oil there in the middle of the jewel, so that's what we're looking for. And then I can put the shock protection system back into place. Now let's put it on the time grapher and see how it's doing. Oh, look at that amplitude, way up, 260 from, 140 or whatever, but it's still running 17 seconds a day fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let all the power out of the mainspring so that I can stop the balance wheel from moving, because on a Rolex, you need a special tool just to adjust the timing. And that's this tool that I have in my hand here. It's called a microstella tool. And if you look closely at the end of the arm, it has that sort of star-shaped opening. And there's these screws on the edge of the balance wheel that are exactly that shape. And these are weighted screws that when you screw them a certain amount per turn, it will slow down or speed up how quickly that wheel goes back and forth. And that's because the weight is either closer or further from the center of that wheel. And the best way to describe this is if you think of like a figure skater, where when they pull their arms in, they spin very quickly, but when their arms are out, they spin slowly. So you can move them in to speed it up. Wow, I got it really close on that first try. We're at +2 seconds a day, but it looks like the beat error is still not quite where I want it to be. So in order to adjust that on a Rolex, you just have to loosen this screw, and then you can just bump this little arm until the beat error is as close to 0 as you can get it. And take a look at where we end up. 0 seconds a day, 0 beat error, and 254 degrees of amplitude. Fantastic result for that movement. And it's just a testament to how good Rolex makes their stuff. Okay, so what I want to do here is, you can see there's kind of some major staining on these hands. So I'm going to use this little pen tool. It has a little bit of leather on the end, and it's I don't know, I guess you would call it like a mild abrasive. It's mainly good at just kind of removing, major stains from it, but not actually scraping on it, if you will. And I am going to relume these hands. I talked to Corey, and this type of lume, it doesn't look good. It doesn't perform anymore. And it's starting to fall out. And when lume falls out of a hand, it goes onto the dial. Well, then it has to go somewhere, and it can make its way around the dial and into the movement, and that's messy. So I told him, you know what? I think it's time, if you're going to be wearing this watch for the long term, that we need to relume these hands. And so that's what I'm going to do. Now, in order to do that, I need to remove the old lume. That's what I'm doing here. And basically it's, just kind of suspended between the two halves of this hand. And I just need to kind of scrape it out of there. And then what I can do is I can put the hands into like a little basket like this, and I can put them into the ultrasonic cleaner, and that will clear off any remaining lume that may still be hanging on into the nooks and crannies of it. Now, while that's getting cleaned up, let's take a quick look at the dial. And you see the color of the little dots of lume around the outside? That is what we want it to look like, the lume on the hands. We ideally want it to match as close as we can get. And so I've got a little lume kit that I've put together here. You can see the hands. Those are all the lumes that I have, and I did them on hands so that I could see what it actually looks like as a reference. And this is the one I'm going to use. This is there's a guy that makes these kits. Noctilumina is what, I spilled some. And they're just, you can pick what you want. There's some of them that are glow in the dark, like these ones, which is kind of the point, but some of them aren't. And you can kind of pick the color that you want. And then what you do is you take the lume powder here and you mix it with what's called a binder. This is just a clear liquid that will dry into something that's hard so that it'll hold the little dots of the lume. And that will get you, well, hopefully as close as you can possibly get to the color that you actually want to match up. And so what you do is you mix these two things together until they're thoroughly mixed together. And then you have, well, it's kind of somewhere between a liquid and a paste is what you're ideally going for. Yeah, it should look about like that. So now what I can do is I can take some Rodico and I can make a little bridge. And this is where I can put the hands so that there's nothing touching that inner gap, right? Because that's the part that is where the lume is going to go, and it kind of needs to be suspended in there. And the problem is that if anything touches that, then the lume will, as a liquid, it will run out into that. So you kind of just need to get like a nice flat surface. You can use a number of different things for this. A little spike will hold the hands as well, and that works too. But I like using the Rodico because it holds them steady. And then there's a little bit of an art form to this. Basically, you want to drag it across the back. This is the bottom of the hand, and you kind of want that luminous material to kind of fill in that gap, with a combination of it being a liquid, but also being enough so that it doesn't run out onto the front of the hand where it can get kind of on the edges. So that's kind of the balance that you're going for. And I know it looks like there's kind of a lot on there, but a lot of that is liquid and that is meant to be evaporated off and dry, and it'll be much thinner by the time it actually dries up. So a little bit of lume here on both the hour and minute hands to hopefully get it close to looking right on that dial. I'm not going to be restoring these hands, mainly because it feels like they more or less match the hour markers, and I wouldn't want like super shiny kind of perfect hands to be contrasted against hour markers that are also a little bit tarnished from the water. Now I'm just gonna, I feel like there's still just a little bit too much on here. So I'm using, this is actually an oiler. This is just an oiler that I'm using to put this on to just spread it thin and even and maybe even take off a little bit. So now I can just let them dry. I usually let them dry for about a day. That's about enough time. And when we come back, let's take a look at how they turned out. Hey, that's pretty good actually. Yeah, I like that color. As you can see, it really kind of blends in with the hand itself. And yes, they do go. Oh, wow. I got that powder everywhere. That's funny. I did not realize it went everywhere. But as you can see, the glow in the dark part does work quite well on those as well. So we will regain that functionality in addition to the look. So I'm going to set these hands aside for now. And we can take a look at the bottom of this rotor. Remember how it has this green corrosion on the bottom? I do want to take care of that because that's not normal. And it does look like it is a result of the water, the moisture having gotten in there. So I'm just going to use some pegwood to clean this up. I just kind of cut it to size, and then a little bit of light metal polish. This is called Flitz. This stuff is like a non-abrasive metal polish. And just to kind of clean it up, you know, I want to make sure that none of that debris that formed on the bottom would ever come off and get into the movement or gum up the works or anything. Plus it doesn't look nice. And look at that. It actually came back really nicely. So job done there. Now I can go about reassembling the automatic winding works. This is the post that spins that weighted rotor, and I can put it on the bottom of the automatic works. And then this is that little C-clip that I had talked about before, the one that I put the Rodico on so it wouldn't fly away. That goes on, and then there's this little gear that holds on. These are what are called reversing wheels. These allow the rotor to spin either direction, either counterclockwise or clockwise, and still wind the rotor. It's a very efficient way to do an automatic winding. If you wonder why they're purple, Rolex says that they're coated in like a kind of a Teflon material for less friction. I just think it looks cool. They don't use it on anything else, but it's kind of a hallmark of theirs, you know, to have the rotors be that color, that deep purple. Okay, so that's all done. Now we can go back over to the movement and continue the reassembly there, because we can wait for the automatic works for a little bit. And I can put on the hour wheel, which has this extra little part on it for the calendar works, which we'll also need to reassemble. This arm is a really interesting one. On the bottom, it has this little post, and there's a little jewel that goes on it. It's called a donut jewel because it looks like one. And it goes right over that little post, and that's actually what pushes up against the calendar mechanism. But it's jeweled so that it will be smooth and last for a very, very, very long time. So this is the calendar wheel. This is the thing that actually pushes the date disc around when it's time to do so, but it's held under a very strong tensioner spring, and I have to hold it aside while I kind of line everything up. It's a bit of an operation, but I think we've got it. This little cap goes on top of the calendar wheel, but it notably has 3 stripes on the top. And if you've seen that before, it means that that part is reverse threaded. And that means that it needs to be put in place by screwing it left to screw it down. And this is the calendar jumper spring. This also allows you to adjust the tension on the calendar a little bit. There we go. Okay, and then there's this ring that goes around the whole backside of the movement here. This basically creates a space for the date disc to exist underneath the dial so that they're not kind of slamming up against each other. And this is the date disc itself. It's got that classic Rolex font on it. I love that. And as you can see, it goes into place, and I can give it a quick test, and yep, turns right over. Now, turning the movement back over, I do need to put on the a couple of parts that control the center seconds hand. There's this this big brass wheel here, and that interacts with this pinion right here. And then I need to put on that little tensioner spring that sits on top of that pinion as well. It's kind of a tricky operation because as you turn down this screw, that spring wants to turn with it, but it needs to sit directly on top. So what I do is hold it with a pair of tweezers and then tension it down, and that seems to work well. Okay, so that's all done. Now let's take a look at this dial. Once again, I notice that there's a little bit of staining on the dial, and I think that that's from that moisture, and I think that will actually come off. Generally speaking, you just don't want to mess with dials very much, but this one, I do think that staining will come off with just water. Yeah, there it goes. Nice. So that's good. Also, again, since there was some debris or some moisture, it's good to make sure that there's nothing sitting on there. And then I'll use that little leather pen that I mentioned before just to clean up the indexes or the indices that go around the outside of the dial. Okay, now I can reinstall the dial and give the calendar a quick test. There we go. And once it turns over, that's where you want to put the hands on at midnight, so that you know that when this watch hits midnight in the real world is when the day will turn from one day to the next. And I can install the hour hand and then the minute hand. And make sure that they're all aligned nicely. And then carefully put that into place. And then the seconds hand can go on. And it just needs a very gentle press to work. And take a look at that. We are ready to put the case on this thing and see how it looks in its nice case. I guess it probably goes without saying for regular viewers of the channel, but for a watch like this, I'm not going to be restoring the case itself. That's where the memories are. You know, this is, if you're wearing this watch for other reasons, then maybe sure. But this is a keepsake for a family member, you know, from somebody who's already passed on. Like the whole point is that, you know, grandpa wore this case and you can see every little ding on it. And that's a great thing. That patina is why I do this. So, so no, I will not be polishing the case on this watch. This is automatic works going into place now. Just a quick test to make sure that it's actually winding. You'll also note that the screws that hold this down are blued. The reason that they're blued, so that you know that they're the ones that hold that down. And you don't put them on somewhere else in the watch. It's just another little nod to the watchmaker, you know, to say, hey, I got your back. Thank you, Rolex. Brand new gasket to go on the back of the case back here. As we mentioned before, that other one was worn out, to say the least. And I can tightly affix that. Oh, whoa. Look at that. The seconds hand, it came off somehow when I was casing it. That is really weird. Let's take a look at what's going on here. It looks like it just straight up came off. I wonder, is it loose? Oh, it does look like it. I shouldn't be able to push that on quite so easily. Let's see if it comes off the same. Yep, it's loose. Well, good news. I have a tool for that. I haven't actually got to use this thing, but this is a tube tightener. So basically it's like a little circular vise that you can pick the size, put it in, and then I'll put the tube, the little bottom part of the hand that actually goes onto that pivot, and I can tighten it down. Watch this. Gently. Like that. And all it does is just gently tighten that circular tube on the bottom, but it should give us enough tension that it'll bite and actually be able to hold on now. Let's see if it works. Yes, much better. Okay, that's fantastic. I'm really glad I had that part. That's really great. And now we can go ahead and continue with the reassembly here as we're almost finished. And wait a second, this is bothering me. Those hands actually don't look right in that case. See, they don't match the hour markers. I think after I used that pen on the hour markers, they cleaned up really nicely, but the hands don't. I thought that the hands would look weird if I overdid it and made them look really good. But it's bugging me, and I think I need to actually do that. As close as we are to being finished with this project, I am going to dive right back in because it's just bothering me too much. Those hands don't look right in that case. They look old and worn out compared to the relatively nice hour markers, and I don't like it. So I'm going to undo the loom job I already did. All that work going away. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give these a very, very light polish. Hands, you have to be really careful with. You either have to kind of redo them all together or you have to have a very deft touch, because for the most part, these are plated. You know, they're gold plated hands. And so you have to be really careful. So this is the hands out of the ultrasonic cleaner with no more loom on it. And what I'm going to do, I know this looks a little bit crazy, but this is actually super glue. And what I can do is I can super glue the hands to this staking block, and that'll give me a flat surface so that I can work on the hands safely without having them move all around and be prone to damage. And then I will be able to, after I resurface them a little bit, I'm going to use that same polish that I used before, that Flitz. It's like it's more like a chemical polish rather than an abrasive, because again, these hands are, they're plated. And so if I try to use any like abrasive, it would probably just take off the plating. So I'm going to use a swab and a little bit of this to just take that top layer of that tarnish off to get them shined up a little bit. Oh no. Yeah, it looks like the plating is actually coming off of these things. Wow, even just from that? Oh no, now I've got two silver looking hands. Oh boy. Okay, down the rabbit hole we go. So first thing I need to do is get the hands off of this staking block. So this is acetone, you know, like fingernail polish remover, and that dissolves super glue. So after just a little bit of time, I should be able to just remove these hands. Yeah, there we go. Oh, you see how they changed from that gold color to now kind of a silvery color? Oh man, I was really hoping that that wouldn't happen. And it's going to put us in a very difficult predicament because I actually need to replate these hands, and I've never plated just hands before. I have replated cases and stuff like that, but not hands. So what I'm going to do is I need something to be able to hang them on that will conduct metal. So I found this little tiny kind of safety pin thing. And then this is, that's actually a click spring from a Seagull ST36. That's actually the movement that we put in the watch kits I mentioned before on Sutcliffe Hansen. And it's what I had that was small enough around to actually hold it. And now I'm going to attempt to replate these hands. So the first thing I'm going to do is electro clean them. This is kind of the opposite of plating, where instead of attracting the molecules to the hands, it actually repels everything that's on it off. And it's like reverse electroplating, and it will help clean the hands and prepare them to be electroplated. And then what I can do is fill up the solution here. This is a gold plating solution. So this isn't scientifically how it works, but you can think of this as having gold like dissolved in it. And now I can set my voltage to the lowest I can possibly go. The voltage and the wattage, they are attached to the size, the mass of the thing that you're plating, the surface area of it. And this is like the smallest thing I can possibly do. So I'm going to try to run the least amount of current through it that I can. Now you can't really see what's going on, but there's electricity flowing through those hands in that solution. And after a little bit of time, we can take it out and see if this worked. This is now stressful stuff, but I really want to get this watch right. This is just distilled water that I can rinse the hands off on. I can't really tell yet if they're good or not. Let's take a look. Are they gold? They are gold. Hey, look at that. It actually worked. I mean, again, I know how to gold plate. I've done it numerous times, but the size is really hard. When they're this small, you have to run such a small amount of current through them. And actually, that's kind of perfect. See, now they have a little bit of wear on them, so they don't look like factory fresh, because that would stand out a little bit on a dial like that. But they look much better than the staining and stuff that they had before. Okay, next up, I do need to relume the hands, of course, and I'm actually going to go a shade lighter than what I used before, because now the hands are a little bit lighter. And so I want it to be closer to what the lume was relative to the hands, right? And so I'm going to go for one shade lighter than what I used before, and I think that'll look just about perfect. I think it'll also match up with the hour lume plots really well too. So I think this will be kind of the perfect compromise. And yes, I know I could have just left it and it would have been fine. It looked pretty good, but these are the details that really make a vintage watch like this sing. And I don't want to ignore them. I really want this one to be awesome. So same process as before, just a light coating of the luminous material that goes on the back of the hand, and then you let it dry. And hopefully these ones can come out great, and they'll match up with the hour markers and the dial and the lume plots and everything really well. Okay. So now all we have to do is let that dry, and then we can continue with hopefully our final reassembly of this thing, because this one has definitely been a bit of a journey. All right, everything's all dried up. How do they look? Ooh, very nice. Yeah, that looks really, really good. Oh, wow, that looks just about perfect. Boy, that's a good improvement from where we were at before, and I think it'll match up even better. So once again, I just need to replace the hands onto the dial here, make sure that everything's good, and then I can go about recasing everything back up again with, boy, a whole bunch of new parts on this watch, and hopefully it looks more or less transformed from its original state. I'll put the case back on, and I'll put a nice new leather strap on it as well for Corey, so that he can get to wearing this watch ASAP. I don't think I would trust the old bracelet. And take a look at the finished product here. How beautiful. Oh, it came out so good. The hands look perfect. Everything's all matched up. Oh, I love that. Oh, I feel like relieved just looking at it, because that was really going to bother me, and it led me down a bit of a rabbit hole. But we'll take it. Does it turn over? Yes, that looked like it was almost right at midnight too. Very nice. And we have a finished Rolex Datejust. And we'll do a quick lume check, and everything looks good. And we've got a finished watch. Thank you so much for joining me for this journey. These are the ones that it's all about, and I'm really glad that you stuck with me for this one. If you want to find me on Instagram, I am wristwatch_revival over there. I'd love to say hi. And with that, we will see you next time.